The shot hit the wall 2 inches from Lieutenant Cole Harper's head, and he didn't flinch. He pressed his back flat against the ruined concrete barrier, counted 3 beats in his head, then leaned out just enough to fire twice before pulling back. Both rounds found their mark. He knew by the silence that followed. 2 down on the east flank, he called into his radio. His voice was low and flat, the tone of a man who had been in too many firefights to waste energy on anything louder than necessary. He was 23 years old. In the combined Joint Task Force assembled 6 months ago at Kepler Station, that made him the youngest human officer by nearly 4 years. It also made him the one everyone underestimated, which suited him just fine. The mission briefing that morning had been simple on paper. A Volkai raider cell had taken over the lower district of Endra City on the moon Talis 4. The raiders were armed with Corvani pulse rifles and had barricaded themselves inside the old fuel processing plant near the southern grid. The joint force, humans, Dravith, and 2 Solaric scouts, was supposed to push them out before sunset. Nothing stayed simple once the shooting started. Cole moved low along the broken corridor, his boots quiet on the ash-covered floor. The plant smelled like burned metal and old oil. Somewhere ahead, Dravith soldiers were holding the northern stairwell, cut off from his position. Through his earpiece, he could hear their heavy breathing and the occasional sharp crack of energy fire. "Cole, we've got 3 hostiles between you and Stairwell 4, said the voice of Sergeant Pete Langley from 50 meters back. Pete was Cole's second, a stocky man from Ohio who had enlisted at 17 and never quite looked comfortable without his rifle in his hands. "I see them," Cole said, though he didn't yet. He was working from sound alone, mapping the space in his head. There were 3 sets of footsteps, 2 moving, 1 stationary. The stationary one was near the fuel junction box, which meant they had a shooter covering the approach. He pulled a small mirror from his vest pocket, angled it around the corner, and confirmed what his ears had already told him. 3 Volkai, dressed in gray carbon armor, positioned in a loose triangle. The one at the fuel junction was watching the North Passage. The other 2 were watching each other's backs and making noise about it, arguing in their clipped, angular language. Cole had learned 12 words of Volkai in basic cross-species training. He didn't need to know what they were arguing about. He just needed to know they were distracted. He moved. The 2 who were arguing never had time to stop. The one at the fuel junction turned half a second too late, and Cole was already past him, pressing flat against the far wall and waving for Pete and the rest of the squad to advance. 6 humans came through in a controlled rush, quiet and fast, the way Cole had drilled them. "Nice," Pete said, stepping over one of the fallen Volkai without looking down. It wasn't admiration exactly. It was just the truth. "Stairwell 4, Cole said. "Let's get the Dravith out before they do something dramatic." The Dravith soldiers, when they found them, were in poor shape but alive. 4 of them, armor scorched, one with a deep gash across his left arm, all standing in the tight cluster that was the Dravith instinct under fire, shoulder to shoulder, facing outward. Their commander, a broad-shouldered Dravith named Orathvel, gave Cole a long look when the human squad arrived. "You are the rescue unit," Orathvel said. His translator gave his voice a faint mechanical echo. "That's us," Cole said. "You are young," Orathvel observed. "People keep saying that," Cole said. "Can you move?" They could. They moved. The extraction took another 40 minutes. By the time the joint force cleared the building and secured the perimeter, the sun was touching the edge of Talis 4's horizon and turning the sky a burnt orange color that would have been beautiful in any other circumstances. The Volkai cell had been neutralized. 3 joint force soldiers had been wounded. No one had been killed. In the context of what could have happened, that was extraordinary. General Mi Lin, the overall commander of Kepler Station's joint operations, arrived at the command post as the last of the wounded were being treated. She was a small woman who walked as though the ground owed her something, and she had a habit of looking at people longer than was comfortable before she spoke. She looked at Cole for a long time. "Walk me through your decision to move before the North Unit was in position," she said. "The window was closing," Cole said. "Two of the hostiles were about to change their position. If I waited for North Unit to confirm, we'd lose the angle and they'd have the high ground on stairwell 4. You made that call on instinct." "On pattern," Cole said. "There's a difference." She studied him a moment more, then gave a single nod that didn't quite look like approval but wasn't disapproval either. "Write your report tonight. I want it on my terminal by 0600. "Yes, ma'am." He was walking back to the transport when Pete fell into step beside him. "You know," Pete said, "you could just say yes, ma'am at the start, too. Might make things easier." "Might," Cole agreed. Pete shook his head slowly, but he was smiling. "You are something else, Harper." Cole didn't answer. He was already thinking about the report, about the pattern he'd seen in the Voakai positioning, about the way Orathvel's unit had clustered under fire, and what that meant for their next joint exercise. He was thinking about 20 small things at once because that was how his mind worked, always forward, always processing, never fully at rest. He was still thinking when they reached the transport, and still thinking when they lifted off the surface of Tailais 4, and the burnt orange horizon fell away beneath them and became just the dark of space, clean and very quiet. 3 days later, everything changed. The eternal deliberation arrived at Kepler Station just before dawn, station time. It was the flagship of the Solaric High Dominion, a vessel so large that the station's external sensors had initially flagged it as an asteroid before the identity codes came through. It hung in the black beyond the docking ring like a small city that had decided to go traveling, and the comms traffic that came with it was dense and formal and very clearly important. Cole heard about it at breakfast, the way most junior officers heard about important things, through the fast, informal relay of people who worked near people who knew things. "Solaric royalty," said Lieutenant Ava Monroe, dropping her tray across from his and reaching for her coffee. Ava was one of the station's best pilots, a lean woman who moved like she was always about to go somewhere faster than everyone else. The princess, apparently, the High Dominion's version of a diplomatic visit. "What do they want?" Cole asked. "Nobody knows yet, but it's got the general's office running in circles, so it's either very good or very bad." Cole considered that while he finished his meal. He didn't have any particular feelings about Solaric royalty one way or the other. He had worked with the 2 Solaric scouts on Tailais 4, found them precise and professional, and formed no deeper opinion than that. But if the flagship was here, the stakes of whatever came next had just risen significantly. He didn't know, sitting there with his coffee going cold, that in less than 48 hours the Solaric princess would walk into a room full of the finest warriors from 6 species, look past every one of them, and point directly at him. The formal reception was the kind of event that made Cole feel like he had wandered into the wrong building. The main assembly hall of Kepler Station had been arranged to look like something between a diplomatic chamber and a military parade. Rows of officers from every species in the joint force stood in precise formation along both walls, their dress uniforms pressed and their expressions carefully arranged into the particular blankness that soldiers wear when they are trying to look impressive without looking like they are trying. The lighting had been adjusted to flattering levels. Someone had placed plants near the entrance, which Cole thought was a strange choice for a space station but said nothing about. He was standing in the 3rd row from the left, between Ava Monroe on his right and a Dravith officer named Grathsal on his left. Grathsal was nearly 2 meters tall and had the kind of stillness that very large, very dangerous creatures tend to develop. He smelled faintly of mineral oil and something Cole couldn't name. They had met twice before and gotten along well enough, which in Dravith terms meant they had not argued. "She tore," Grathsal said quietly, not looking at him. His translator gave the words an even, unhurried quality. "The princess?" Cole asked. "She selects an escort, a personal guard." one individual from the joint forces, to travel with her delegation during diplomatic circuits. It is a great honor for whichever species the choice comes from. A pause. Every Dravith warrior here has trained specifically for this moment. Cole looked along the row at the Dravith officers. They were all standing with a specific kind of intensity, backs straight and chins slightly elevated, the posture of people performing readiness. He understood then that this was not just a diplomatic visit. This was a selection, and everyone in the room knew it. Every species puts forward their best, Grathsal continued. She chooses one. That warrior's people gain significant weight in solaric negotiations for the duration of the circuit. How long is the circuit? Cole asked. 3 standard years. Cole absorbed that. 3 years traveling with a solaric royal delegation, representing humanity at the highest diplomatic level the High Dominion offered. General Lin had made no announcement, given no guidance. Either she trusted her officers to conduct themselves appropriately, or she had not known the full nature of the visit when it was confirmed. Possibly both. The doors at the far end of the hall opened. The Solaric entered in a formation that was both practical and deliberate, 2 rows of guards in pale silver armor moving in absolute silence. Their steps synchronized in a way that suggested either intense training or some quality of the Solaric physiology that Cole didn't fully understand. Between them walked 3 advisors carrying ceremonial objects whose meaning Cole did not know, and then, behind them, the princess. Her name, relayed through the diplomatic briefing that had gone around the station that morning, was Surinavath of the High Dominion's 3rd line of succession. The briefing had included a physical description, but physical descriptions, Cole had found, were rarely adequate for anything real. She was tall, taller than any human in the room, with the characteristic solaric coloring, a deep iridescent quality to her skin that shifted between deep blue and violet depending on the angle of light. Her eyes were very large and very pale, almost colorless, and they moved with a deliberate, unhurried quality as she scanned the room. She wore formal robes in layered deep colors, and the way she moved in them suggested that she was completely comfortable with the weight and the formality, that it was not something she wore for occasions but something she simply was. She walked to the center of the hall and stopped. No one spoke. The Solaric had their own protocol for silence, and whatever this moment required, they were observing it. General Lin stood at the front of the room with 2 other senior officers, all of them wearing the same carefully controlled expression. Then Surinavath began to walk. She moved along the right wall first, slow and considered, looking at each officer as she passed. She paused briefly at a Solaric officer near the front, exchanged something that seemed like a quiet recognition, then moved on. She passed the Dravith row, and Cole could feel Grathsal go very still beside him, the stillness of something waiting to spring. She did not stop. She crossed the front of the room. She moved along the left wall. She passed the human row and did not stop there either. Cole thought for a moment that she might leave without choosing. He had read about ceremonies like this in cross-species briefing documents, rituals that served diplomatic purposes without a concrete outcome, their meaning symbolic rather than functional. Maybe this was one of those. Then Surinavath turned and walked directly back to the center of the room. She turned to face the rows again, and this time her pale eyes moved with more purpose. They swept once, twice, and then they stopped. Cole became aware, with a quiet certainty that he couldn't entirely explain, that she was looking at him. He met her gaze without looking away. He was not trying to be bold. He simply had no particular reason to look somewhere else. She walked toward him. The hall, which had been almost entirely silent before, became the specific silence of many people choosing not to breathe. She stopped in front of Cole, and the height difference was significant enough that she was looking down at him slightly, the way a person looks down at something they are taking seriously. "You," she said. Her voice was low and precise, her translator giving it a clarity that felt formal without being cold. You were in the lower district of Talis 4, 3 days ago. It was not a question. Yes, Cole said. You moved through the eastern corridor without covering fire. Then you neutralized 3 armed hostiles in approximately 4 seconds and cleared a path for the extraction of 4 Dravith soldiers who would otherwise have been cut off until nightfall. Cole said nothing. She had it exactly right, and adding to it would have been filling silence for the sake of it. I watched the tactical recording, she said, twice. There was a very quiet sound from somewhere in the Dravith row. Cole did not look to see what it was. Surinaveth reached out and touched 2 fingers briefly to Cole's left shoulder, which his briefing materials had mentioned was a solaric gesture of formal acknowledgement, not a claim, but a recognition. He's mine, she said clearly in the direction of General Lin, not looking away from Cole. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room completely and then keeps going past the edges of it. Cole heard Ava Monroe make a very small sound beside him that might have been a suppressed cough or something else entirely. He did not look at her either. General Lin said carefully, "That is Lieutenant Cole Harper. He is one of our officers." "I am aware of what he is," Surinaveth said. There was no impatience in her voice, only precision. "I am expressing my selection under the terms of the escort accord, which your command confirmed 3 days ago when the eternal deliberation entered your system." General Lin said nothing for a moment. Then, "Of course, we are honored." Surinaveth finally looked away from Cole to regard the general. "You should be. He is the only one in this room who looked at me without deciding what I was before I reached him." She turned back to Cole. Up close, her pale eyes had depth to them, layered and very clear. "Can you be ready to depart in 4 days?" she asked. Cole considered the question the way he considered most things, quickly, completely, and without performing the consideration. 4 days. He had no particular attachments at Kepler Station beyond the work. His squad would adapt. Pete Langley would have opinions about this loudly, and then adapt too. "Yes," he said. She gave a single inclination of her head. Then she turned and walked back to her advisors, and the formal reception continued, but something fundamental had shifted inside it. The Dravith officers were maintaining their posture and expressions with visible effort. The Solaric guards were as still as ever. Ava Monroe leaned very slightly toward Cole and said, in a voice barely above a breath, "I have so many questions." "I'll answer one," Cole said. "Just one. Pick carefully." She thought about it for 2 full seconds. "Do you actually know what just happened?" Cole considered the question seriously, which it deserved. "I think so," he said. "She chose me for the escort circuit, 3 years. Diplomatic travel with the High Dominion delegation." "That is the least interesting part of what just happened," Ava said quietly. Cole let that sit there without answering it, because he was fairly sure she was right. And he was also fairly sure that he would need to think carefully about everything that followed before he said anything more about it. Later, after the reception had formally concluded and the Solaric delegation had returned to the eternal deliberation, Cole stood in the corridor outside the assembly hall while Pete Langley paced back and forth in front of him, running through every possible reaction. "You didn't flinch," Pete said. "She walked up to you in front of everyone, said he's mine, and you didn't flinch." "No," Cole agreed. She watched the tactical recording from Talis 4. Twice. She flew her flagship to Kepler Station, and she already knew which recording she wanted to watch. "That does seem to be what happened," Cole said. Pete stopped pacing and looked at him. "Harper, a Solaric princess just claimed you as her personal guard, in front of General Lin and 300 mixed-species officers. Do you understand what that means politically?" "I understand the outlines of it," Cole said. "Do you understand," Pete said slowly, "what it means that she looked at you and didn't look at anybody else?" Cole was quiet for a moment. The corridor was empty except for the 2 of them, and the station's ambient hum was the only sound. "I think," Cole said finally, That it means I need to learn a great deal more about the Solaric than what's in the briefing materials. Pete stared at him. Then he let out a long breath that was almost a laugh. You are the least dramatic person I have ever met. Thank you, Cole said. It wasn't a compliment. I know, Cole said. I'm taking it as one anyway. He went back to his quarters and sat at his desk, and pulled up everything the station's database had on the Solaric High Dominion. Their diplomatic structure, their escort accord, the history of selections made through the circuit process, the way their royalty traveled and what it meant to travel with them. He read for 4 hours without stopping. Then he wrote his report about Talis 4, because General Lin had wanted it by 0600, and he was not going to miss a deadline simply because a Solaric princess had changed the shape of his future. The 4 days before departure passed at a pace that had nothing to do with the number of hours in them. General Lin called Cole into her office the morning after the reception. She sat behind her desk with her hands folded and looked at him the way she always did, like she was measuring something that hadn't finished growing yet. You understand the weight of this, she said. It was not a question, but Cole answered it like one. I'm representing humanity in close proximity to the Solaric High Dominion for 3 years, he said. Every interaction will be observed. Every mistake will be remembered. Every success will set a precedent. Close proximity, she repeated and paused on the words briefly. That's an accurate description. The escort serves as the princess's primary external advisor during diplomatic circuits, not just a guard. You'll be in rooms where alliances are formed. You'll know things before most governments do. Cole absorbed that. The Solaric chose you, Lin continued, which means we cannot decline without significant diplomatic cost, and I'm not sure I would decline regardless, because this is an opportunity for humanity that doesn't come often. She paused. But you're 23 years old. Yes, ma'am. Do you have a problem with that? You're asking if I think I can do this. I'm asking if you know what you're walking into. Cole thought about the honest answer. No, he said, not completely, but I know how to operate without complete information and I know how to learn fast, and for whatever reason she thinks I belong in that room, I'm not going to tell her she's wrong. Lin looked at him for a long, flat moment. Then something shifted at the corners of her expression, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. Your briefing packet will be updated by tomorrow, she said. Take everything that applies to the escort protocol. Learn it. If you embarrass this station, Harper, you'll have a very long 3 years. Understood, he said. Then, because she was still watching him, he added, I won't embarrass the station. She nodded once he left. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. There were formal documents to sign, agreements between Human Command and the Solaric delegation that outlined Cole's status during the circuit, his chains of command, his communications protocol with Kepler Station. A Solaric cultural liaison named Vethsal, small for his species and precise in the way that very well-trained people tended to be, arrived at the station to give Cole an accelerated briefing on Solaric court protocol. The things Cole needed to know were numerous and specific. He needed to know how to stand in a Solaric formal gathering, which was different from how humans stood in theirs. He needed to know which forms of address to use for each rank of the delegation, and which to avoid unless specifically invited to use them. He needed to know the 12 situations in which it was acceptable for him to speak without being asked, and the 6 in which silence was mandatory regardless of what he witnessed. He absorbed it all with the same attention he gave to a tactical brief. Vethsal noticed. You do not take notes, the liaison observed on the second day. I don't need them, Cole said. Vethsal studied him. The princess said you would be like this, he said, which surprised Cole enough that he showed it. She told you about me. She said you were a person who processed before speaking and acted before doubting. The liaison's tone was neutral, informational. In Solaric terms, that is a very high form of assessment. Cole filed that away with everything else. On the third day, Pete found him in the training bay running through a conditioning routine that he kept to wherever he was, not because the upcoming posting required it, but because the routine was part of how he stayed level. Pete sat on a bench near the wall and watched for a while before speaking. "I want to say something that might annoy you," Pete said. "Go ahead," Cole said between reps. "I think she picked you because of what she saw on that recording, but I also think that's not all of it." Pete paused. "I've been watching people in the military my whole adult life. The way someone stands under pressure, the way they move when they think nobody important is watching. You have something that most people don't have, Cole. I don't know how to name it exactly." Cole slowed his pace but didn't stop. "You're being unusually thoughtful today." "I'm going to be your contact point at Kepler Station for the next 3 years," Pete said. "I want to say this before you go because after you go I'll be professional about it, and this is me being unprofessional for exactly 1 more minute." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Don't disappear into it. Whatever happens out there, remember what you actually are, not what they need you to be for the circuit, not what the diplomatic reports will say, what you actually are." Cole paused his routine and looked at Pete directly. "Which is what?" he asked. Pete shrugged. "Someone who moves through a hostile corridor without making a sound and gets 4 people out alive before anyone realizes he's done something extraordinary." A pause. "Don't lose that." Cole nodded once slowly. "I won't," he said, and meant it. On the 4th morning, Cole boarded the shuttle to the Eternal Deliberation. The vessel was, from the outside, large enough to make Kepler Station look like a service module attached to something real. From the inside, it was a structured world, not a ship in any sense Cole had previously understood the word, but a traveling court. There were sections for formal gathering, sections for daily life among the delegation, sections whose purpose he did not yet understand and would presumably learn. The corridors were wide and lit in a cool, bluish-white that suggested the solaric found that frequency of light calming. The air had a faint quality to it, slightly different from station air, not unpleasant but noticeable. Vethsal guided him to his quarters, which were larger than he expected and sparsely furnished in a way that felt deliberate rather than empty. A single long window looked out on the approach to the station's docking ring, and beyond it, the dark. "The escort's quarters are adjacent to the princess's outer chamber," Vethsal explained. "This is both practical and symbolic. You will be available on short notice. You will also be seen as part of the inner circle by everyone in the delegation." "What does the inner circle think of me being human?" Cole asked directly. Vethsal paused in a way that suggested he had prepared for a more indirect version of this question. "They have questions," he said. "Some have doubts. This is not unusual when a selection is made from outside the traditional candidate pool." "What do they need to see?" "That depends on the individual," the liaison considered. "For most of them, competence is enough. For some, the question is not competence but loyalty, whether a human will prioritize human interests when they conflict with the delegations." "And how does the princess see that question?" Vethsal looked at him. "She doesn't ask it," he said. "She decided before she walked into that hall." Cole sat with that for a moment. Then he nodded, and Vethsal left him to settle in. He did not unpack right away. He stood at the window and looked at Kepler Station, growing smaller as the Eternal Deliberation moved through its departure sequence. He could see the docking ring, the communications array, the long spar of the main corridor section. He had been at that station for 14 months. He had not thought of it as home exactly, but it was the place where everything familiar had been concentrated, and now it was getting smaller, and eventually it would be a point of light, and then it would be nothing visible at all. He was still standing there when someone knocked at his door. It was not Vethsal. Surinaveth stood in the corridor without her formal robes. She wore something simpler, still clearly solaric in design, layered and precise, but without the ceremony. She was slightly less tall than he had registered in the assembly hall, which meant the robes had added something, or his memory had adjusted for the occasion. Her pale eyes were the same. "I wanted to speak with you before the formal introductions begin," she said. "May I come in?" Cole stepped back from the door. She entered, looked at the empty surfaces of the room with an expression Cole couldn't quite read, and then looked at him. "You haven't unpacked," she said. "Not yet," he said. "Are you reconsidering?" He thought about the honest answer to that. "No," he said. "I'm looking at where I came from before I stopped being able to see it." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the window. Kepler Station was considerably smaller now, a bright point against the dark. "I did that too," she said. "When I first traveled as part of the delegation, I was 12. I stood at a window and watched the home world become something that fit in my hand." A pause. "It changes you, but not in the way you expect." "How then?" Cole asked. She looked at him. "You learn that the things you carry with you are more permanent than the things you leave behind." She paused. "I should not be talking to you like this before the formal introductions. There is a protocol." "I know," Cole said. "Vethsal briefed me." "But you didn't ask me to stop," she observed. "No," he said. "I didn't." She looked at him for a moment more, then gave the slight inclination of her head that he was beginning to understand was her particular way of acknowledging something she found worth acknowledging. "The formal introduction is tomorrow morning," she said. "Tonight, the inner circle will have dinner. You should be there. It will be observed. Be exactly what you are." "What am I?" Cole asked. She paused at the door. "Someone who doesn't need to be told who he is," she said. "That is why you're here." Then she left and the corridor was quiet and Cole turned back to the window. Kepler Station was a point of light. Then the drive engaged and it was simply gone, absorbed into the vast and indifferent dark. He unpacked. Dinner was, as promised, observed. The inner circle of the Solaric delegation numbered 11, plus 2 advisors who said very little and wrote everything down. They gathered in a room with a long table and the cool blue-white light and food that Cole approached with a careful curiosity, having been briefed on which items were compatible with human biochemistry and which were not. He ate what he could eat and left the rest, and nobody commented on it. They commented on him in other ways. Questions were asked through the structure of polite conversation. What did his rank signify in human military structure? What was his specialty? How long had he been in service? Cole answered precisely and without elaborating beyond what was asked. He noticed which members of the delegation asked and which waited. He noticed who made eye contact and who avoided it. He was mapping the room the same way he mapped every room he entered, out of habit and out of necessity. Across the table, Surinaveth did not look at him often. When she did, it was brief and gave nothing away. It was only much later, reviewing the evening in his head before sleep, that Cole recognized what she had been doing. She had not been avoiding him. She had been watching the delegation watch him, seeing which of her circle would accept the choice and which would not. She was, he understood, someone who always had at least 2 things happening at once. He had known people like that before. He was one of them. He closed his eyes and the ship moved through the dark, and the circuit had begun. 6 weeks into the circuit, they arrived at the Corvani sovereignty. Cole had been to the edge of Corvani space once, during a patrol mission in his first year of service. He had not gone deeper. The Corvani were humanoid enough to be immediately legible to most species, but different enough that the differences mattered, and their internal politics were the kind that shifted without warning and left debris. They had been in a cold dispute with the Solaric High Dominion for 11 years, the kind of dispute that was always about something obvious on the surface and always about something else underneath. The delegation's arrival was formal and precise. Surinaveth moved through the reception ceremonies with the practiced ease of someone who had done this across multiple circuits, acknowledging each Corvani official at exactly the right level, giving nothing away, taking quiet note of everything. Cole watched the Corvani watching her, and watched them watching him, and kept his own expression neutral and his posture steady. The Corvani sovereign's name was Dale-Ra, and he was a tall, angular figure with the characteristic Corvani bone structure, prominent facial ridges, eyes set wide, hands that were longer than a human's and moved in ways that read as deliberate even at rest. He received Surinaveth with what Cole had learned to identify as correct Corvani courtesy, no more and no less, which meant the relationship was somewhere between cautious and transactional. When Dale-Ra's gaze moved to Cole, it stopped there. "Your escort," the sovereign said to Surinaveth. "Lieutenant Cole Harper," she said, with the slight tone that Cole had learned was her way of indicating that further questioning was acceptable. "A human," Dale-Ra said, and the word had a texture that Cole couldn't fully read. Not hostile but not neutral either, considering. "Yes," Cole said, because the silence had stretched to the point where filling it was correct. Dale-Ra looked at him directly. The last Solaric escort from a non-traditional species was 4 circuits ago, a Dravith. He lasted 17 months before requesting recall. "He had reasons," Cole said. "He found the pace difficult," Dale-Ra said, and there was something sharpening in his expression that Cole recognized as a test being set up. "I've read about it," Cole said. "He was isolated within the delegation. That had nothing to do with the pace." Dale-Ra went still for a moment. Then he looked at Surinaveth. Something passed between them, the rapid, unspoken exchange of 2 people who had met many times before and had developed a shorthand. "Your escort reads his predecessors," Dale-Ra said. "He reads everything," Surinaveth said, and there was something in her tone that Cole was not going to examine in the middle of a formal reception. The state dinner that evening was the long, considered architecture of Corvani formal gathering, courses separated by musical interludes, speeches at intervals that were as much performance as communication, an arrangement of people around the table that was itself a statement of relative importance. Cole had studied Corvani dining protocol and sat where he was placed and ate what he could eat and watched everything. He noticed, about an hour in, that a specific Corvani minister, young, with the kind of stillness that came from training rather than nature, was watching the delegation's movements with an intensity that went beyond diplomatic curiosity. The minister sat 3 places from the sovereign and spoke very little, and every time Surinaveth addressed someone across the table, the minister's attention shifted in a way that tracked position rather than conversation. Cole turned this observation over carefully. He did not act on it yet. He gathered more data. During the second musical interlude, he leaned slightly toward Vethsal, who was seated nearby, and said quietly, "The minister at position 7 from the sovereign's right. Do you know his function?" Vethsal was quiet for exactly the length of time it took to look without appearing to look. "Ministry of External Communications," he said. "Relatively new, appointed in the last cycle." Cole nodded once, said nothing more. At the end of the evening, as the delegation moved through the formal farewell sequence, Surinaveth fell into step beside Cole for precisely the 30 seconds that protocol allowed and said, very quietly, "You've been watching Renavieth." It was not a question. Cole noted that she had been watching him watch. "He's not observing the delegation," Cole said, equally quiet. "He's mapping it, entry points, departure timing, which members separate from the group and when." Surinaveth's expression did not change at all, which was itself a response. "The talks tomorrow are technical," she said. "The resource agreement discussion. Renavieth is not on the technical committee." "I know," Cole said. "Was you know more by morning?" "Yes," he said. That night Cole went through everything the delegation's intelligence files had on the Corvani Ministry of External Communications for the past 8 cycles. It was mostly dry material, personnel records, organizational charts, communication logs between ministries that had been gathered through standard diplomatic channels. He read all of it, which took most of the night, and by 3 in the morning he had the shape of what he was looking at. Renavieth had been appointed not by the sovereign but by a rival faction inside the Corvani governance structure. His role in external communications was technically legitimate but strategically placed, a position that put him at every formal gathering without making him responsible for outcomes. He was an observer by official function, but the faction that placed him had interests that ran directly counter to the resource agreement currently on the table between the Corvani sovereignty and the Solaric High Dominion. Cole prepared a summary, specific, brief, without speculation beyond what the data supported. He sent it to Vethsal at 5 in the morning with a note that read, "For review before the morning brief." He was in the corridor outside the inner meeting room at 7 when Surinaveth appeared, already dressed for the formal session. She stopped when she saw him. "You've been awake all night," she said. "I slept 2 hours," he said, which was accurate and slightly beside the point. She looked at him for a moment. "Vethsal showed me your summary." "I know," Cole said. He had assumed she would see it before the morning brief. That was why he had sent it when he did. "The faction Renaviath serves has an interest in the talks failing," she said. "Or being delayed long enough for their counter-proposal to gain internal support," Cole said. "The resource agreement is time-sensitive on the Solaric side. If it doesn't close in this session, the next window is 14 months away. That's long enough for significant domestic pressure to shift the High Dominion's position." Surinaveth was quiet for a moment. "What do you recommend?" He had given this thought too. "You already know Renaviath is watching," he said. "Use that. Don't try to work around him. Put something in the morning session that makes staying useful to his faction. If he's reporting back, let him report something that serves you." "A deliberate misdirection." "Information that is true but incomplete," Cole said. "You're not deceiving anyone. You're choosing which truth to make visible first." She looked at him with the particular attention she gave things she was deciding about. "This is what you do," she said. "Not just in corridors with hostile forces. Everywhere." "It's how I stay oriented," Cole said. "Understanding the shape of a situation before I move in it." "Most people who came before you in this role," she said, "saw their function as protection. Physical presence, physical response." "I can do that too," Cole said. "I know," she said. "But you already understand that the actual danger in rooms like last night's is not physical." She paused. "That is not common." Cole said nothing to that, because it seemed complete without his addition. The morning session went the way Cole had outlined. Surinaveth handled the deliberate misdirection with a precision that was genuinely impressive, she mentioned, in a context that would reach Renaviath through normal channels, a particular scheduling constraint on the Solaric side that implied more flexibility than actually existed. The information was true in the narrowest sense and misleading in every practical one. By midday, Renaviath's behavior had shifted noticeably. He was reporting. What he reported would reach his faction with a confidence that the talks could be delayed without consequence. The talks were not delayed. The resource agreement was signed 2 days later. That evening, Dalera requested a private meeting with Surinaveth. It was an unusual request at that stage of a diplomatic visit, and the delegation's advisors were cautious about it. Cole was not invited to the meeting. It was between heads of state, but he was in the outer corridor when Surinaveth emerged, and she paused beside him. "He asked who prepared the analysis on Renaviath," she said. Cole absorbed that. "What did you tell him?" "The truth," she said. "He said to tell you that you would be a formidable Corvani." A pause. "It is, apparently, a high compliment." "I'll add it to the list," Cole said. She looked at him sidelong. "You have a list." "Grathsal told me I was young. Dalera says I'd make a good Corvani. General Lin told me not to embarrass the station." He paused. "Pete Langley told me not to disappear." "And have you," she asked, "disappeared?" Cole thought about that honestly. He was not the same person who had stood at the window watching Kepler station become a point of light. 6 weeks of the circuit had changed him in ways he was still mapping, ways he didn't have complete language for yet. But there was still something that felt unchanged at the center of it, the same instinct that had moved him through a hostile corridor without covering fire, the same quality of attention that had made him look at a Solaric princess without deciding who she was before she arrived. "Not yet," he said. She nodded with the inclination of her head that was her particular form of acknowledgement. "Good," she said. "I chose what I chose. I would like it to stay." She went inside, and Cole stood in the corridor for a moment before following at the correct distance, and the circuit continued, and the shape of what he was becoming was still forming, still moving, not done yet. The next 6 months took them through 4 more diplomatic stops, 2 of which were routine, and 2 of which were not. At the 3rd stop, a border station on the edge of Dravith space, a weapons display organized by the hosting delegation turned into a genuine standoff when 3 members of a rival faction arrived uninvited and armed. Cole had the situation contained before the delegation's security team fully processed what was happening, not through force, but through a rapid repositioning that placed him and 2 Solaric guards at the most critical angle while simultaneously communicating, through body language alone, that escalating would be a mistake. Nobody escalated. Afterward, in the delegation debrief, one of Surinavath's senior advisors, a woman named Avalra who had been skeptical of Cole's selection from the beginning and had not hidden it, looked at him for a long moment and then said without preamble, "You did not draw a weapon." "No," Cole said. "Why not?" "Because drawing it would have been the signal they needed to fire theirs," Cole said. "The goal was to make firing unnecessary. A weapon drawn is a commitment. I wasn't committing. I was making the situation look more stable than it was, so they'd have time to reconsider." Avalra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the careful precision of someone revising an assessment in real time, "I see." It was not an apology, but it was something. The last diplomatic stop of the circuit's final year was one nobody had planned for. The station was called the Nareth Point, a neutral platform positioned at the meeting of 3 territorial boundaries, Solaric, Dravith, and a smaller but significant species called the Helori, who had been requesting formal recognition from the High Dominion for 2 decades. The eternal deliberation had arrived for what was supposed to be a brief courtesy stop, an acknowledgement of Helori diplomatic persistence, a gesture without binding consequence. It became binding on the 2nd day, when a Dravith military vessel arrived at the point without warning. Cole was in the outer briefing room with Vethsal when the alert came through. He was on his feet before the second pulse of the alert tone, moving toward the inner chambers, already running through what he knew about Dravith military protocol at neutral points. An unannounced military vessel at a neutral station was either a provocation, a miscommunication, or a third thing that required more information before he could name it. The vessel was identified as the Grathsal warship, and that name stopped Cole cold for exactly 1 second before he processed the implication. Orethvel's command ship, the same Dravith commander whose unit Cole had extracted from Stairwell 4 at Talais 4 nearly 3 years ago. Cole requested direct communication. The Solaric communications officer looked at him with the expression of someone about to explain protocol, and Cole said quietly, "Please route it. I know the commander." The communication came through audio only, which was the standard for non-negotiated contact. Orethvel's voice came across with its characteristic measured quality, the translator giving it that faint mechanical weight. "Lieutenant Harper," Orethvel said. "Commander," Cole said, "you're at a neutral point unannounced." "We are," Orethvel said. "There is a situation you should be aware of before it becomes official through other channels." Cole said nothing, giving the commander space to continue. "A Helori delegation was traveling toward Nareth Point for this gathering," Orethvel said. "Their transport was intercepted 2 days ago by an armed group, not military, not affiliated with any recognized authority. The Helori are unharmed, but they are being held, and the group holding them has sent a demand to the High Dominion." Cole processed this in layers. An independent armed group, not affiliated with recognized authority, holding a Helori delegation and making demands of the Solaric. At a neutral point, 3 days before the circuit's formal close. "What do they want?" Cole asked. "A statement," Orethvel said, "signed by the princess, that the High Dominion will not grant the Helori formal recognition for a period of no less than 30 cycles. 30 cycles, a generation by most species measure, long enough to make the Helori request meaningless." "Why come to us directly?" Cole asked. "Because the demand arrived at the High Dominion through a channel that suggests the group has inside information about the delegation's schedule. They knew you were stopping here. They knew the timing." A pause. "And because I owe you a debt, Harper, from a stairwell 3 years ago." Cole absorbed that. Orethvel had tracked the delegation circuit, had learned about the interception in time to arrive ahead of official channels, and had come here to give Cole the information early, before it went through formal structures that might slow the response. "I need 6 hours, Cole said. "The deadline they set is 14 hours from now," Orethvel said. "I will hold position at Nareth Point until this resolves. I am not here officially. My presence is a personal decision." "Understood," Cole said. "Thank you, Commander." The communication closed. Cole turned to the communications officer and said, "I need to speak with the princess now, not through the advisors." The officer, to her credit, simply nodded and opened the inner channel. Surinaveth was in the formal chamber with 3 advisors when Cole came in. She looked at him once and said to the advisors, "Leave us." They left, and Cole told her everything in the order he had received it, clearly and without padding. She listened without interrupting, her pale eyes steady. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "They expect me to sign," she said. "Or refuse publicly, and the Helori are made to suffer for it," Cole said. "Either way, the Helori recognition is set back. Either the statement exists and prevents it, or the incident poisons the relationship enough to delay it politically." "It is a well-constructed pressure," she said. The word she chose was not admiration, but it was something close to respect for an adversary's craft. "It works on one assumption," Cole said. She looked at him. "That the only options are sign or refuse publicly," he said. "It doesn't account for a third response." She was quiet for a moment. "You have one." "The group has inside information," Cole said. "They knew the delegation's schedule. That means someone in or adjacent to the delegation shared it. It also means they believe the situation is known only to them and the person who sent the demand." "But Orethvel intercepted it," she said. "And came here first," Cole said. "So they don't know we know, and they don't know we know when the intercept happened. If we can identify their location before the deadline, the response is not a signature and not a refusal. The response is the removal of the demand entirely." She looked at him for a long, even moment. "You think you can find them in 6 hours?" "I think the schedule leak tells me where to start," Cole said. He went to work. Vethsal assisted, and 2 members of the delegation's communications staff who had the necessary clearance. The schedule information that had been shared with the armed group was specific, not just the stop location, but the timing and the intended outcome of the Helori meeting. That level of detail narrowed the source significantly. Cole worked backward through every communication that had referenced the Nareth Point stop, cross-referencing access levels and timing. 4 hours in, he had an answer. The leak was not inside the delegation. It was a Helori communications official who had been feeding schedule information to an anti-recognition faction within Helori political structure, a faction that would lose considerable power if the High Dominion granted the recognition they claimed to want. The armed group had no connection to any external power. They were a tool of internal Helori politics, being used by people who feared the outcome they publicly supported. Cole brought this to Surinaveth with the documentation. She read it in full, which took 3 minutes, then looked up. The Helori government, she said slowly, does not know their own delegation is being held by a faction within their own political structure. The government wants the recognition, Cole said. This faction wants the credit for a process they secretly want to fail. If the recognition happens, they lose relevance. If it fails visibly, they gain by default. Surinaveth set down the documentation. Tell me the rest. If this information goes to the Helori government directly and immediately, Cole said, they handle their own internal problem, the delegation is released, and the armed group is exposed as a domestic faction with no legitimate grievance against the High Dominion. You never had to sign anything. You never had to refuse anything publicly. The situation resolves without the High Dominion taking a position on Helori internal politics. And the recognition process proceeds on its own timeline, Cole said, which was always Helori space to manage. Surinaveth looked at the documentation one more time. Then she said, contact the Helori government. Use the secure channel we established on arrival. I'll make the call myself. Do you want me in the room? She paused. Yes, she said. The call lasted 40 minutes. The Helori government's response moved through stages, shock, then controlled urgency, then the flat efficiency of people who had shifted into problem-solving mode. They asked Cole 2 direct questions during the call, both of which Surinaveth redirected with a look that told him to answer. He answered both. Within 3 hours of the call, the Helori delegation had been located and freed. The faction involved was detained by Helori internal security. Orathvel, still holding position at Nareth Point, received a brief update through a communication that was technically not an official channel, but that everyone involved understood perfectly. The Helori government sent a formal statement to the High Dominion. It was careful and specific. Gratitude for the manner in which the situation had been handled, explicit acknowledgement that the High Dominion had not inserted itself into an internal matter, and a renewed request for formal recognition proceedings to begin at the next available diplomatic session. That evening, with the delegation gathered for what would be the last formal dinner of the circuit, Cole sat in the same chair he had taken at his first Inner Circle dinner 3 years ago. The room looked the same. The light was the same cool blue-white. The faces around the table were familiar now in a way that had come gradually and felt complete. Avalra, who had questioned him from the beginning, raised her glass and said something in formal Solaric that Cole's fluency, genuinely built over 3 years rather than just translated through Vethsal's assistance, rendered without difficulty. It was a short phrase that meant something close to those who make the path visible. Everyone at the table responded in kind. Cole raised his glass. After dinner, Surinaveth walked with him to the outer observation deck. It was not strictly within protocol, but the circuit was 20 hours from its formal close, and some things sat outside protocol by the weight of their own timing. The observation deck looked directly into open space. No destination visible yet, just the dark and the scatter of stars that were too far to be individual and too many to count. There is a question I have not asked you, she said, after a long quiet moment. Go ahead, Cole said. When you go back, she said, and stopped. She started again. When the circuit closes and you return to human command and all of this becomes something in a file somewhere, what will you say when they ask what it was? Cole thought about it honestly. 3 years, 14 diplomatic stops, 3 of which had been crises of varying kinds. The Corvani resource agreement, the standoff at the Dravith border station, Avalra going from skeptic to something he didn't have a word for yet. Orathvel arriving at a neutral point out of personal debt, because of a stairwell and 4 people, and a decision Cole had made in half a second. I'll say it was the most complicated 3 years of my life, he said, and that I didn't disappear. She was quiet for a moment. The ship moved, and the stars moved with it in the slow way that wasn't really movement but was the feeling of it. You are very young, she said, and it had a different weight from every other time he had heard those words. "I know," he said. "In 4 years, when the next circuit is proposed," she said, "the escort position will need to be filled again." She paused. "There is precedent for continuity." Cole looked at her. She was looking at the stars, her profile against the dark, precise and thoughtful. "Are you asking?" he said. "I am noting a precedent," she said, and the corners of her expression shifted in the way he had learned to read, across 3 years of watching her in every kind of room and every kind of moment. It was, by Surinavath's standards, something very close to a smile. Cole turned back to the stars. The circuit was closing. Kepler Station was out there somewhere, behind them and ahead of them in the curved logic of space travel, the place where everything had been familiar, the place where General Lin had said not to embarrass the station, where Pete Langley had told him not to disappear. He had not disappeared. He had not embarrassed anyone. He had gone into a situation that nobody fully understood and moved through it the way he moved through everything, forward, attentive, without performing himself for an audience. And somewhere in that, in the space between a hostile corridor 3 years ago and this moment on an observation deck, with the dark pressing soft against the glass, something had been built that did not have a diplomatic name or a protocol designation, or an entry in any briefing document he had ever read. He did not try to name it. He was not, he had learned, a person who needed to name things before they were ready to hold a name. He was 26 years old, and the stars were very far away and very present, and the circuit was closing, and the next one had not yet begun. But it would,